Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Art of Life Explorations. I'm Angela Hardy from Cloud9, and every now and again I do these fascinating interviews with fascinating people just to talk about some of the things that they've learned on their journey of life and some of the ways that they help their clients to reach happiness and contentment and find their passion and to just have a beautiful, connected, joyful, happy, beautiful experience of their lives. What I do, if you don't know me, is I teach people how to love themselves, how to find joy and pleasure and peace, how to experience themselves in a whole new way that is self-accepting and self-loving. And I'll give you details about how to reach me and how to reach Karin later on. But first, let me introduce to you Karin Ritchie. Oh, and there's the phone that I didn't turn off. Beg your pardon. Yeah, I was really organized this morning.
Good timing.
Yeah, perfect. This is Karin Ritchie. I met Karin about, Karin, would you say 1,000 or 2,000 years ago?
Long ago.
Back in the day when I started my flotation tank business, and Karin used to come to me and float. She used to run a very successful hardware store. And we used to chat and we used to have this wonderful time, and we always were so connected and had a wonderful time talking to each other back then. And then one day she came to me and she said, "Oh, I've started doing yoga and it's amazing and it's completely changed my life and I'm completely passionate about it and I'm quitting this hardware store business and I'm going to do something else." And I was thinking about people to talk to, and Karin popped into my mind, and I thought, well, now that's going to be an interesting story, because it's been many, many, many years and a long journey, I'm sure, Karin, since that day.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your journey, how you came to being in this place. You do somatic coaching, you do all sorts of interesting things that we're going to talk about. Tell me how you came to be here.
Okay, I'm going to try to make a long story as short as I can. I come from a very, very simple family, and a home that was very unstable, in that there was a lot of violence, and there was, in those days people were rough and ready. Well, it was like that in my home. And I left home and got married at a very young age. And very soon I found myself in a business with my ex-husband. And it was an industrial supply company. And how I got there was, he had an electrical wholesaling business. And we decided to branch out and do the industrial hardware. But after a year, this thing was insolvent, and our auditor said, just shut it down. And my ex-husband said, would you like to go and take on this company? That was in 1982, and I was a very, very young woman. And off I went and started running. At that time, it was really a little hardware shop. And it was a fantastic experience because I knew nothing about anything that I was doing.
Yeah.
But the clients and the suppliers really taught me, because the one would ask me for something, and I would find somebody that knew about this something that this someone needed. And so my humble childhood, my eagerness to find the goodness in life, because it wasn't really so readily available, was what led me to do this so easily serve and be humble and say, I don't know, and how can I serve you in a good way? And so this company carried along. And then when I got divorced, I took the hardware shop, and it became really, I needed it for my livelihood, and really took it on in a very, very big way. And that company grew, to my surprise. And one of the growth points, to me, it's always been when things go bad, it's as if things then have the possibility to explode into something else. So in 1998, I traveled on my motorbike through Africa, and I left that little company for a month and just had to go and kind of find myself. And by the time I got back, that company was actually insolvent. And what had happened is there'd been an internal fraud that I hadn't picked up because I was going through a divorce. I was in quite a mess. And this thing came to the light. And at that time, the two major creditors and the bank got together because basically I was supposed to shut down. And they said, what do you need? And I said, look, I don't know. I guess I should try and carry on trading. And the bank manager at the time, her name was Karin Ritchie, she said, next week, let's meet and you give me a cash flow. So the next week she and I met, and she said, so what are you going to do about, where's your cash flow? And I said, I'm finished. Don't you get it? I'm finished. I'm done. I'm going to close my doors. And she said, no, you're not. Here is a cash flow projection for you. Here is the overdraft you need. I'll pay your creditors and you're going to keep going. And I said, fine.
Wow.
She believed in me when I really didn't believe in myself. And when we talk about life, it's look inside of ourselves, but also look who's there that can see something that we can't see at the time because things are too hard. And a year later, I had traded out of trouble and I was nominated for Businesswoman of the Year. And I was a finalist. Along with Maria Ramos won that year, and I was second in line to her. So suddenly, things had shifted very, very drastically. And so I guess I'm no stranger to sudden and big changes. And so that company grew and went along very well. And I became, in this time, a long-distance runner. I would run comrades and marathons and so on. And of course, there again, something went wrong. I sustained a serious injury in my left knee and I had to have surgery. And, the surgeon said, your long distance running days are over. So, wow, running was, something so important to me. So I decided I needed to find another form of exercise. And
and someone said, oh, yoga's exercise.
Well, so I thought yoga's exercise. Yeah.
As well.
Yeah, it is that. And off I went to yoga and, really discovered my soul, my depth, just got in touch with my deeper longings, my deeper, because until now, I had so responded so directly to what was before me, responded directly. And I wasn't aware of deeper longings, of what really, really drove me. Until now, it was struggle that leads to striving. That was the way it worked. And it worked. It really, it worked.
And well, it worked to make you financially stronger, but how was your life,
That's right. And it's so true. And at the time, I felt that life was really very, very good. And it was. However, I had to quite a large extent avoided the deeper life, which at the time I met you was when I was really beginning to just explore. Okay, so out there, it can look great. And, and it was great. It had gone so well for me. And by the way, another moment where the deeper life called me very strongly was at this Businesswoman of the Year, being interviewed and people are asking questions. And as I stood there, I felt a bit of a fraud standing there because I felt, how can I be a better business person, a business woman, than all these women here who have achieved so much? And in that
Sorry, Karin, can I just interrupt you for a moment? Won't you just move your screen a little across so that you're centered on this frame for me? I'm just losing half your ear on the one side and it makes me a bit uncomfortable.
This way.
Trying to clear around the corner. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, carry on.
Thanks, Ange. So in that moment, I stood there and I realized the fact that I'm standing here has got something to do with me and nothing to do with me. It's beyond me. And it was an extremely humbling moment where I didn't feel like a fraud, but where I felt so humbly grateful that all the streams of life had brought me and placed me here like this.
Right.
And I think in that moment, a seed of trust and recognition of the greater goodness of life arrived. You know, because I was actually awestruck in that moment when I realized this is just my moment to have for life's own reasons, you know, that are within me and beyond me. Does this make sense, what I'm saying to you?
It does make sense to me. I think that there's a thing that we don't get until we get. And that is this idea that there's a certain kind of a surrender that we have to do to the flow of life. You know what I mean? I've spent many, many years like you. It's all driven, it's all grasping, it's all up to me. Push, 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 push.
Yes.
And anxiety driven, fear driven pushing. Do you know what I mean? That lack of flow, the lack of sense that I will be okay, that I am okay. And then I realized that actually that pushing is completely unnecessary. Which is not to say that I do not need to pay attention to my life or take care of my life or show up in my life. But that angst-filled, grasping clutch to make it happen in some specific way that it's got to look like.
Yes.
So it makes perfect sense to me. I think that we're on a conscious experiential adventure. And the idea that it has to be something and look like something is it's a very big misunderstanding that actually drives us to be more unhappy, less connected, more desperate, more stressed, more fatigued, more anxious, because we think that we have to do more than just experience consciously what life is.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And that word desperate, you know, when I sensed into it, in my appearance, I would appear totally calm and contained. And to some extent, I absolutely was. But underlying, and I still know it, is something desperate, you know. It doesn't have a strong hold on me at all anymore. But every now and again, I reckon, oh, yeah, you are. Oh, hello. Yeah, you are. That's something that started very early in life when essentially I didn't feel safe. I felt a little bit desperate, you know?
Yeah.
So that desperate was one of the fuels, that desperation was one of the fuels that drove me, for which I'm grateful. But I'm also grateful to be able to put it aside and say, you're no longer required. And kind of thank you for serving me until now.
Well, I mean, from my point of view, I always find that the belief that I needed to be so angst and so grasping kept me angst and grasping.
Yes.
Because thinking that it was the angst and the grasping and this like chasing of life that made me successful made it very hard to give up that way of chasing life.
Yes.
Because then, of course, there's the risk that you will never be successful again, that you'll never be able to make a living, or you won't be able to do the things that you want to do. And actually, I find, and I'm sure that you find the same, that that's really not true. In fact, I'm better at living, and I'm better at succeeding, and I'm better at getting the things that I want when I don't have that level of desperation or that fear that I won't get what I want in me.
Absolutely. One of the keys for me, though, is the recognition of the desperation.
Yes.
It was so natural to me that I would, if anyone said you're desperate, I would have said, what?
No.
Look at me. No. But it was such an essential foundation block that it was so known that one of the biggest things to getting through it was recognizing it,
Yeah, I hear you.
Because for many of us, it feels natural to feel desperate and in a space of survival rather than living.
Right, and you've been doing life that way since birth.
Yes.
So the thought of not doing that life that way, or that there's a possibility that you didn't have to do life that way, or that there was some other experience to be had, seems very out there.
Exactly.
And quite scary.
Yeah.
In a way. Like, and I need not try to do it another way, that I don't know how to do it another way. I don't know that it's possible or that it's safe to do it another way.
Correct. And my career as a trauma therapist, my second full career, has really my understanding of the nervous system and being able to sense those deeper levels of fear, of terror, of anger, of rage, where we're living in an absolute survival rather than living. And helping myself and others just negotiate those layers, because they've served us. They've held our life together until now. So we don't trash them, but we begin to negotiate and undo them so that there's a fuller living that happens biologically. It's biological, it's not controlled by our mind. It's a biological shift that happens.
So how do you go about working with that? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Tell the people watching, how do you start that negotiation? How do you go about doing that? Or is that too complex a question to be answered in a short period of time?
It is a very big question. It's a very, very big question. And my qualification, let me say, is I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner. So it's a modality developed by a man called Dr. Peter Levine, who has received a very, very, very big international scientific award for bringing this work to life.
He does the TRE stuff, am I correct?
Not at all.
No. I've
not
read his book. So what was his book about?
It's about trauma resolution, but TRE is it's totally different. Our work is called somatic experiencing.
I thought that these things were related to him, that names seem to be connected for me. Okay, tell me more.
Yeah, you're not the only one who would think that. People often think that that's what we do. But it's different. So Peter Levine's question arose, being a scientist and being a psychologist, was that he worked with people with many problems and he could find solutions. But what he found, that with trauma, he couldn't find a way through. People would just stay more stuck. And then he decided to go and look at nature. And what he noticed is, if you imagine, as South Africans, it's not so easy. It's easy for us. There's a veld, and there are impalas grazing, and over there you could see some zebras and so on. And the next thing, there'd be a rustle in the grass, and a lion would just, usually a lioness, would come charging. And what happens in the impala is what he observed. So the first thing is to sense there's a threat. The body prepares itself and it runs for its life. Fight, flight. We know these. It's not going to fight with the lioness, it's going to flight, and it runs. And then as we watched, what sometimes happens is one impala will get taken off the back of the pack. And that's one story, but we're looking at the story of those others of us. We survived. Those that do get away from the difficult things that happen. And what he noticed happened is the rest of the pack would keep running, the herd, I should say, would keep running. And at a certain stage, they would stop. And they would always do the same thing. They would look around, and then they'd kind of shake something off, Very often there'd be kind of a pronking, a celebration, I got away. And then they'd go back to a state of relaxed awareness. Now, human beings, I was held up in my yoga center in 2006. I have resolved. But many people have been held up in armed robberies or hijackings and are still not relaxed and aware, are still not back in their lives.
Right, their nervous system is still playing that story that they're under attack.
That's correct, exactly it. It hasn't yet, like the impala, stopped, recognized I'm actually safe, shake off the charge, the adrenaline, cortisol, and all the others, and the innateness that wants me to fight or run away. So in many of our lives, you'll get those people instantly angered, or you'll get, I cannot stay in a relationship, I've got to keep running. And we can work with that psychologically until we're black and blue. But the biological inclination we haven't dealt with.
It's
so our work
in that program
exactly is undoing. So in other words, the felt sense, the instinctive, the reptilian brain instinct that gets me to fight or gets me to flight, I need to shift from there through to the emotional brain and the reasoning brain. And shift that. And the other thing that people would struggle with is, they'll be in a little argument or a little conflict, and afterwards they'll say, I just froze. Why didn't I say something? And they would so shame themselves. But actually, that's a biological freeze that happens.
Freeze, fight, or flight.
That's correct. It's the other, So my work is to help people undo those innate responses that are stuck and incomplete from an event that happened. Because if you think about it, a traumatic event is over. It's done. That happened. But it's what stayed behind in me, what is incomplete in me, is what we work with.
That's really interesting. I do a kinesiology technique called neuroorganization technique, and it's very much about this as well. It's very much about freeze, fight, or flight. And then the way that the guy describes it, which is really quite clever, he says it's almost like you've got a DB board for your nervous system. And some of those switches have gone down. And because some of those switches are down, you're still alive, but your system is not working properly. And so your whole body thinks, I'm still at risk. I'm still in this dangerous experience in this moment, even whilst you're not. And the result of that is that your body thinks that it's a weaker and a weaker creature in the jungle. This is what he says. You're a weaker creature in the jungle. And you want to get rid of that sense that you're so weak in the jungle, that there's nothing. So this is like all of this emotional trauma that comes with it, and this long-term sense of yourself. It's not just I've got some trauma that sometimes gets triggered. It's not just my body doesn't respond as though I'm not in fight or flight, but it's also this emotional, ongoing sense of myself being weaker and weaker in the jungle.
Precisely. And that's where the instinctive response to threat gets fed through. And then the emotional things happen. And the mind interprets that as I'm weak. And that's when we talk about neural pathways that get stuck in this way. The session that I worked on this morning, what was so beautiful is because you asked, how do we work? Is she recognized, I helped her to see that her switching off of herself, her freezing of herself, that autonomic response, when she could see that she actually has agency, she could feel and see exactly how she does it. Yes. And I invited her. So if you see you do it, feel it. It's you doing it. It is coming from reptilian brain, from instinct, but use your conscious mind. She could track herself, freeze herself, and unfreeze herself. Freeze herself and unfreeze herself. And suddenly, what you just said, she said, wow, I have agency over this. Exactly. Exactly. So it's employing the mind, it's employing the logic to track the experience of what happens in my knowing body. And helping that to release that, because actually, like the impala, the threat is over. You know, I am safe now. And that's what Peter Levine discovered. He said that's the difference between the impalas and human beings, is the impala shakes it off. They clearly recognize the lion's not here now. And the impala's not saying there's never going to be a lion again.
No, because there is.
Exactly. So it's alert, it's vigilant, but where we get stuck is in hypervigilance.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And then those people who suffer from generalized anxiety disorder and all sorts of panic attacks and things, that hypervigilance comes when you see an apple on the table and when you see a car passing by. And these things are completely unrelated, but they become related in the mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the instinct that feeds through the threat response to the other centers. You know? And that's why we can often feel I have no agency over it, because we've become to feel if I can think about it, if I can control it with my mind, I can. But actually, the reptilian brain is the oldest brain. That is the one who came first, and it is the highest authority.
Yeah.
It is the highest authority. So, and the instinct has a language. The instinct has a language. So, if you think about it, the part of our brain that thinks, that uses the language is words. You know, the neocortex. It thinks. It speaks. And then the other part of the brain, the limbic system, is to do with attachment, emotion, and so on. And its language is emotion. And now, interestingly, people are not so curious. So what is the language of the reptilian brain, of the oldest brain in the body, of the one that has the last say, actually? It's the one who will give us the power to lift the car off the child.
Yeah.
Or that gave me the power to negotiate with armed robbers, and they said, you're coming with us now, Mama. And I said, no, I'm not. Actually, I'm giving you my car key. I'm going to help you take whatever it is you want. I'm going to open the garage and you are leaving. You're going to go. And they said, yes, Mama. And we did it. You know, that's not me. That is instinct at its best.
Right.
And the language of that instinct is felt sense, is sensations.
Yes.
Because if you think of it, I feel safe. It's not an emotion. It's not a thought. It's beyond them, and it includes all of them.
Yeah.
So in the work I do, that's where I come and meet you first. Yes, we'll meet in the emotions and the thoughts. Then we begin to employ the instinct, the reptilian brain, so that we begin to recognize our agency over that one too, but also trust it. Because it has actually been
got a job to do. Yeah, it's got a job to do.
And if you and I are sitting here, it means it's done it well, because we got through it.
Live to tell the tale.
Yeah. And Angela, you know, what I'd like to say about, you know, when I started practicing yoga and I went into the deeper life and started untangling, it's then also that I began to ask myself, Karin, what do you want? What matters to you? And there was this nagging regret and sadness in myself that I hadn't become a psychologist, because that was the modality I knew, because I had seen psychologists for so many years. They had helped me so much in my life. And I was now, in my late 30s, and how could I now become a late 30s? No. Hang on a second. Late 40s. What am I talking about? How can I now switch, to become?
Yeah.
And my staff started teasing me and say, you are more interested in our well-being than in our performance. Things are really, well, this is really how it is for me. And my sense was I should change, but I had no idea with my logic how to change. How do I shift out of this to that? And I couldn't see a way out of this good career in business into something else.
And in some ways, that logic becomes especially difficult when you're doing well.
Angie, precisely. It becomes a bit of a golden handcuff.
Yeah.
And society would frown upon you. Why would you want to leave? Especially, I was in a male-dominated environment, and my peers and my, said, "Well, this woman's gone a bit mad. It's this yoga. She's gone a bit crazy." But the turning point came when I was actually held up in that armed robbery. There were 6 of us in the yoga center on a Sunday evening. And during a very, very traumatic event, and the next morning, a friend of mine called and said, "I'm so sorry." He's a psychologist, and said, "I'm so sorry this happened, and how are you?" I said, "Look, I'm in a mess. I got through it well, but I'm in a terrible state. Like you were saying, the apple would frighten me. I was in a state of absolute terror." And I reckon all the terror I hadn't felt earlier in my life, in a very violent past, suddenly caught up with me. I could suddenly feel it. And he said, "There's a woman from Germany in town, and she does this trauma work, and maybe you should see if you can see her." And I called her, and she said, "I fly out tonight, but I've got 1 session left." I went to see her, and during the treatment, I said, "This is my work. This is what I'm going to do." 6 months later, I found myself in Italy, ready to do this new work. So, to study. So, once again, it was within me and beyond me, and it was a shake-up. And that's where I feel this pandemic, it's here for each of us to evolve, to ask each of us, feel the shake-up, feel your dreams, feel your longings, and breathe, pause, stop, and let life guide you, because that's, and as a trauma therapist, for me, it is an absolute privilege that people stop in with me when life as it is doesn't make sense anymore. It's just, it's desperation, because that's the portal for newness. Because if we're quite satisfied, we can keep going.
No reason to change anything now.
Yes,
absolutely. Yeah,
those comfort zones.
I mean, it's such a privilege actually to walk any kind of transformational journey with somebody. I don't do that much trauma work myself, but I do transformation stuff. It's like a new understanding of life, and this whole stuckness, I see it so much. I saw it in myself. I see it in my clients, this like grasping onto what I have for fear of what I can't have.
Exactly.
And this is why I find it so interesting to listen to somebody's journey, how they took themselves from, I had a job, I had a career, I made a lot of money, I did well. I was at actually the top or the peak of that career, you know what I mean, businesswoman of the year. But I made a choice anyway to go and do something that was more heartfelt. And that's, to me, such a beautiful, interesting experience, because it does take courage, and it does, you do have to give certain kinds of things up. Do you know what I mean? And the things you give up is your attachment to who you think you are, or to your money, or to your, do you know what I mean? Sometimes you've got to give up a lot of attachment to that kind of thing. But it's a hell of a great journey, because it's the destination, to me, seems to be very worthwhile.
Yeah, so much so. And do you know, Angie, what happened is when you speak, it's risk. I actually left my career and I went to India. My daughter took over our company and I left because I knew that my attachment to businesswoman, woman with a yoga center on the hill, my attachment to those titles was going to keep me stuck. So I said, the only way I can do is for me, I'm not saying it's always necessary, but I walked away from it all with a backpack and I went to India and said, I've got to go and find out. And I didn't find it. I found myself. I found the messed up self. Many days I lived in a small village. I lay on the floor. I didn't have a bed. I had a mattress on the floor. Real village life. I found I needed to catch up to feel all the pain of the earlier life that I had escaped with a successful life. And I'm not saying this is the only way, but for me, that was what I had to. I had to fall into a place where no one knew me. No one cared about my background or who I was. I lived the life of an Indian wife in a village, literally in a small little room, sleeping on the floor, and really so that I could like almost bottom out and dare to dream what my longing was, dare to dream. And so going through the layers of that agony also for me helped me become clearer and more courageous, because it looks courageous to do courageous things in business. But believe me, courage to inside and face the agony that I had escaped from, running, business, all sorts of things, travel, that one was a big one. And as I look now, my passion to serve people's evolution and people's living, that's what kept me going in business. When people said, well what was it? It was, people would phone me, my production line has stopped, I need help now, and that urge in me to be of assistance in life, to serve, it was there all along. And I bowed to it because it really helped me in business, and continued then to be expressed in a different way now. And the business thrives. It goes on beautifully.
Good. Nice.
Which amazes me too,
You left a little legacy there, girl.
Yeah, beautiful legacy, Yeah.
And does your daughter still run it?
No. She left it some years ago. She left it, and we've had for the first time, a man's running the company for 5 years. And I was very afraid when a man came in. The company was run to me on feminine principles. It was about a harmonious environment. It was about integrity. It was about people should feel happy to work there and to call into us, and it should be that way. And wow, an incredible man. Our third attempt at a new person to run the company was the best, was amazing. So what's fantastic is that he's a CA, so he's got this fine intellect, mind, education, and his heart is even bigger than that mind. So he runs the company beautifully. It gives me such joy.
Well, I mean, from me to you with love, I just want to say that I salute you, because a change, to take that kind of pathway that you really go into yourself to find that passion and that purpose, and are willing to take a chance on it and to give up all that you had to make it happen for you. It is a big deal. It does take a lot of courage. And I know that I work with a lot of people who come to me and they say, well, I want to know what my passion is. And we talk about it a lot. And the fact of the matter is that we have to give up a lot of those things, especially the ego parts of us, especially the way we define ourselves in our careers and in our who we are, to be, and we have to gentle ourselves almost, you know what I mean? We have to gentle ourselves and be willing to in some ways, be more, I think about this as gentling, but it's a more authentic feeling of self. Do you know what I mean? And I think about that as gentling because it feels more comfortable and more gentle, in not so fighty and so clutchy and so desperate. Yeah. So it does feel more gentle, but it does take courage to do that. I know that as well, that it takes courage, and I really salute you for having done that in your own life. So what advice would you give then to those people who are perhaps in that state where they're thinking, I don't know what my passion is, I don't know what my purpose is, I want to get a handle on that? What would you say to them, having been on that road yourself?
You answered that question a few moments ago.
I wonder what your answer is.
I've never said it like that. I've never heard it said like that before, but gentle yourself would be one of them. You know, it's something about, take time, the pandemic has done it, is stop. Stop. Dare to stop doing what you're doing. Allow yourself to feel what you're feeling. And reach out for resources that could, that bank manager that came and said, I said, I'm finished. Don't you understand? I'm finished. I'm bankrupt. And she said, no, you're not. Here is a cash flow projection. Here is, you're going to pay us back in this way. Is allow resources to come in and let them gentle you, so that trust begins to grow in the goodness of yourself and in life itself. So pause, just stop for a while. Stop for a while. Because then we can see the resources that are there, or the opportunities. For me, it had to be a drastic stop. I had to take myself out of South Africa and away, because I'd grown this company. It was my child. I had to remove myself. It seems now, but pause. And recognize the support that is there. Recognize yourself. And become aware of, where am I surviving and not living?
Yes, I love that. That's a really important question.
Because if I'm still running, I'm in survival mode.
I read an amazing book by a guy. It was called The Illusion of Money. And he had this one little exercise to do within the book. And I did that exercise and I found it amazing. I asked my clients to do it quite often. And he said, there's a lot of things that you think you own that actually own you.
Beautiful.
And he said, sit down and think about what you think you own that actually owns you. And, when you look back and you see all of that success, all of that wonderful success in the business, but when your heart desired something else, unless you were willing to not own it, it owned you.
That's it.
Until you were willing to say, it would be okay for me not to have to be here owning this thing, it actually made your life, it dictated to you who you were going to be, what you were going to do, what was going to happen next.
Sure.
It was such a great exercise for me. And actually, if you're watching this, I recommend that you try it. Just sit down with a journal and write, what do I think I own, and actually what owns me? And when I did that exercise, what was really interesting is that I stopped talking about the physical stuff, the money, the car, the house, and then I looked at the relationships, and then I looked at my own body, and then I looked at my own mind, and I realized I don't own anything. I don't own my own mental health. That is a temporary custody that I have of my body and of my mental health and of my physical health. Never mind my house, my car, my whatever, my relationships, the people in my life. I have this beautiful capacity to have a temporary experience or relationship with these things.
Yes.
And in that realization comes this beautiful emotional freedom, because I do have mental health in this moment. So, wow, that's cool. And then the second is, how am I appreciating my mental health in this moment? You know what I mean? Am I treating it like this throwaway thing that I just, I don't pay any attention, I have no appreciation for it, I don't stop and smell the roses of my mental health? Or do I go, wow, it's cool to be alive, and how am I using this mental health to experience that? To have a blissful or wonderful or joyful experience of my life? Mm-hmm. Which maybe one day, if I have dementia or Alzheimer's, as my husband's aunt has, suddenly just disappears. So I have it now. So what owns me and what do I own was a very interesting, and I think that you really went through that experience when you said, okay, I'm willing to not be owned by this, as I am willing to not own it anymore.
Well, you know what's interesting for me when you say that, you spoke about earning, and you said the successful business, and as you were saying that, I was feeling the burden of it as well, the striving, the struggle, the constant fear I was in, that part of me that said, I'm finished. That was also what was owning me to a large extent.
Yeah. That's how you know it owns you instead of you owning it, right?
Yes.
That's how you know. Because that feeling comes up.
Yes. And if we pause, we can feel what's owning us.
Yeah.
When we pause.
Yeah.
Okay. I love
that. And as you mentioned, that feeling, it's exactly my experience of doing that exercise. Was the moment I realized that something owned me and I was willing to not be owned by it, I could feel immediately in my body this amazing sense of freedom from it. Even as I still had it. I still own my house, sort of. Well, I still have custody of my house, but I'm free from a burden of it. It's not a burden to me anymore, because I'm willing to not own it. Do you know what I mean? I'm willing to be that. If owning it is a burden, then I'm perfectly willing to not own it.
Correct.
And now I have custody of my house instead of ownership, and that seems perfectly comfortable to me.
Yeah. And in the beginning, you spoke about a certain surrender flow. I think you used one, and I can feel it's that as well. I'm willing, I'm willing. If this house should not be the house for me anymore, well, then I'm willing to, it's a let go thing. I think letting go,
big
is such a
lesson.
big thing. Yeah. And it's
huge,
a big gift. It's huge.
Yeah. And I guess that's part of what COVID is teaching us, isn't it? It's to let go a little bit, to who you thought you were, how you thought things had to be, what you thought the world had to look like, how you thought you had to be in that world, what you thought you had to do in that world to be you. It's a big letting go. Yeah. And I can say with all honesty, there's some things I'd really rather not let go of. Thank you very much. But be that as it may, when I'm sitting at home and I can't play badminton, I'm having to let go. And so then I must find a way to be at peace with that.
Correct. I love the English language, and as you speak, the word recognize comes in. We recognize our realities. We recognize what matters. And for many families, they drew closer. Many families split up and recognized, okay, this isn't all that I wanted it to be, or not, this is so badly what I want. How can I embrace this more and make it better? And that's that pause again. It forced us to pause and see what matters.
Well, the lesson for the day, people, pause. Pause, feel, go into the body, Let it speak to you. It's got a huge language. It's got a lot to tell you. And if you pay attention and listen to it, certainly it will be your guide. Am I right? Excellent. Summary in 3 seconds. Thank you so much for joining us today, Karin. It was a sweet, sweet pleasure to see your beautiful face again and to catch up with you after all of these years. I really appreciate you being here with me.
It was my pleasure and my privilege. Thanks so much, Ange. I love being here with you.
Thank you. Okay, so let me just put this little ticker tape here at the bottom for us as we sign out and say goodbye to you all. If you do want to reach Karin, where are you living again? Remind me.
I live in Sedgefield on the Garden.
So, Karin Ritchie, but you do work online, yes?
Mostly online, yeah.
Okay, so there you go. She's got the perfect experience that she's made up for herself. Online work, you can work with Karin anytime if you're working with trauma. If you'd like to check out what she does, she has a website. What is it?
It's KarinRitchie.com.
Perfect.
Exactly.
And you can check out my website, cloud9.co.za, and you can see what the two of us do if you're all interested in doing some work with either of us. I'm going to put all of my details, all of the free stuff that I do, all of the YouTube videos, all of that stuff below this live in Facebook. Karin, if you have anything that people can access in that line, anything that you're doing, any free stuff that you do, any workshops that you do, anything, pop that below so that anybody can take a look at it who's interested. And I'll see you again for another Art of Life Expectations coming soon. Bye-bye, Karin. Have a beautiful one.
Thanks, Ange. You too. Thank you. Bye.